Like Pac, if I'm not mistaken, he died on the table one time in surgery 3 times. And they kept bringing him back to life multiple times.
The world believed Tupac's life ended in a hail of bullets, but his coroner exposed something more disturbing. He was revived multiple times and could have survived the deadly shooting until someone inside the hospital ensured he never walked out alive. And that's where the story takes its darkest turn: the shooting and the chaotic ride to the hospital. On the night of September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur attended the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. The bout ended quickly. Seldon went down in the first round, and as fans poured out of the arena, Tupac, accompanied by Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight, became entangled in a violent confrontation in the MGM Grand lobby. Surveillance footage later confirmed that Tupac and members of his entourage assaulted Orlando Anderson, a reputed member of the Southside Compton Crips. This altercation would prove pivotal. Anderson would emerge as the primary suspect in the shooting that followed just hours later. After the scuffle, Suge Knight insisted Tupac ride with him. Multiple sources note that Knight made a phone call while others fled the scene, a detail that later fed suspicions that the ambush was prearranged. Tupac climbed into the passenger seat of Knight's black BMW 750 IL sedan around 11:15 p.m. While stopped at a red light at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane, a white Cadillac pulled alongside their vehicle. Gunfire erupted. Tupac was struck 4 times, once in the arm, once in the thigh, and twice in the chest, with 1 bullet puncturing his right lung. Knight himself was grazed in the head by bullet fragments but remained conscious. The scene was chaotic, with police cruisers and flashing lights overwhelming the strip. Suge Knight's BMW was riddled with bullet holes, and officers initially struggled to determine whether the occupants were victims or shooters. Witnesses later recalled the panic of the entourage scattering, vehicles swerving, and traffic grinding to a halt. Despite the gravity of his injuries, paramedics rushed Shakur to the University Medical Center, UMC, Las Vegas's premier trauma hospital. Witnesses emphasized the unusual nature of the ambulance ride. According to firefighters who later gave interviews, Metro Police escorted the ambulance with multiple officers riding inside, an uncommon measure that suggested heightened security concerns and underscored Shakur's celebrity status.
And then with 3 Metro Police officers inside their ambulance and a police escort, not typical protocol, a ride to University Medical Center, followed by Jim telling Shane who their patient was.
Initial medical assessments were grim. Reports indicated that upon arrival, Tupac was already in critical condition, with doctors immediately placing him on life support. Later accounts suggest that by the time he reached the hospital, Shakur may have technically been dead, his body revived only through machines and aggressive resuscitation techniques. The 6 days that followed would be marked by contradictions, confusion, and emotional turmoil. Official accounts vary, but consistent details confirm that Shakur underwent multiple surgeries, including the removal of his right lung, and suffered repeated cardiac arrests. During this period, his family and friends were led to believe that recovery, though difficult, was possible. Desiree Smith, an associate of Tupac, recalled,
"She said that the doctor said that Tupac was going to survive, and she said that Tupac's family was already setting up plans to send him to Arizona before he can go to rehab."
The apparent optimism from doctors contrasted sharply with the dire accounts of paramedics and officers at the scene. This dissonance would fuel decades of speculation that something happened behind hospital doors that has never been fully revealed. On the night of September 7th, 1996, the center of the boxing world converged on Las Vegas for the heavyweight bout between Mike Tyson and Bruce Seldon at the MGM Grand Garden Arena. Among the celebrity guests was Tupac Amaru Shakur, the 25-year-old rap icon whose fame extended far beyond music into film, activism, and cultural influence. He attended with Marion Suge Knight, the imposing co-founder of Death Row Records, the label that had signed Tupac in 1995 after his release from prison. This outing was not casual. Knight had personally arranged for Tupac to accompany him to the fight, a decision that later drew scrutiny because of what unfolded afterwards. When Tyson quickly dispatched Seldon in the first round, the crowd dispersed. As Tupac and his entourage walked through the MGM Grand lobby, they crossed paths with Orlando Anderson, a 21-year-old member of the Southside Compton Crips. Anderson had been linked to a prior robbery of a Death Row affiliate, and tensions exploded immediately. Surveillance cameras captured Tupac and Knight joining in as members of the Death Row entourage assaulted Anderson. The beating was brutal, and hotel security intervened but made no arrests. Everyone left the premises, but the altercation had already set events into motion. Investigators later argued that this lobby fight served as the catalyst for the drive-by drive-by shooting hours later. After leaving the MGM, Knight and Tupac prepared to head to Club 662, a Las Vegas venue, owned by Knight. Witnesses reported that Knight insisted Tupac ride with him rather than with bodyguards and other vehicles. Multiple accounts note that Knight stopped to make a phone call after the altercation, even as others rushed away. This small but significant delay provided an opportunity for assailants to track their movements. At approximately 11:15 p.m., Knight's black BMW 750IL reached the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. As the vehicle idled at a red light, a white Cadillac pulled up alongside the passenger side. Gunfire erupted. Shakur was hit 4 times, once in the right arm, once in the thigh, and twice in the chest. One bullet penetrated his right lung, inflicting catastrophic damage. Knight, despite being grazed in the head by bullet fragments, managed to remain conscious and maneuvered the BMW away from the scene, though the vehicle's tires were damaged after striking a curb. Police and bystanders described a scene of chaos. An entourage of cars traveling with Knight and Tupac scattered in panic, some attempting to follow the Cadillac, others circling back to assist. The strip was congested with traffic, complicating the response. Witnesses later told investigators they heard as many as 14 shots in rapid succession. Among the first responders were 2 paramedics, Jim and Shane, who happened to be working nearby. They later described the intensity of the moment when they realized who the victim was.
Jim and I did everything that we could and gave him every ample, but the general public doesn't know that.
When police secured the area, Sergeant Chris Carroll of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department approached the BMW. He attempted to open the passenger door but found it damaged from bullet impact. Forcing it open, he discovered Tupac slumped inside, gravely wounded.
Well, he's leaning against the door. So when I pulled open the door, he kind of fell out with the door, kind of slumped out with the door as I opened it. So I grabbed him with my left hand and kind of took him down to the pavement.
Carroll quickly saw the extent of Shakur's injuries: multiple gunshot wounds, heavy bleeding from the chest, mouth, and nose. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Recognizing the potential for a legal dying declaration, Carroll pressed him. "Who shot you?" Tupac, despite struggling for air, summoned the strength to respond.
And I go, "What happened, man?" I go, "Who shot you? Who did this?" And he started, he's trying to get a breath together, and he's looking at me, and I thought he's actually going to tell me. And he got his breath together, and he looked at me and he said, "You."
Seconds later, he slipped into unconsciousness, blood gurgling as his airway filled. The brutality of the ambush was underscored by the condition of the BMW. Photos taken later revealed bullet groupings clustered around the passenger side, evidence that the shooters specifically targeted Tupac. Suge Knight, though bleeding from his scalp, showed little outward concern for his own injury. Carroll noted how Knight remained focused on Shakur, yelling his name repeatedly while blood streamed down his head. By the time he arrived at UMC's trauma center, Shakur was unresponsive. According to accounts from medical staff, his heart had already stopped at least once en route, requiring resuscitation. Later interviews suggested that by the time he reached the hospital, Shakur may have been clinically dead, sustained only by aggressive emergency intervention and machines. For the next 6 days, reports from inside the hospital painted a confusing picture. On one hand, Shakur underwent surgeries, including the removal of his right lung, and doctors placed him in a medically induced coma. On the other hand, conflicting statements suggested glimmers of hope. Desiree Smith recalled,
She said that the doctor said that Tupac was going to survive, and she said that Tupac's family was already setting up plans to send him to Arizona so he can go to rehab.
These contradictions between the apparent optimism of some medical staff and the bleak assessments of paramedics and police would later fuel speculation that something more transpired within the hospital walls than has ever been admitted publicly. Inside the hospital, conflicting reports and suspicious events. When Tupac Shakur was admitted to University Medical Center of Southern Nevada, UMC, on the night of September 7, 1996, his condition was already critical. Emergency surgery began almost immediately. Doctors removed his right lung, which had been punctured by one of the bullets, and attempted to control severe internal bleeding. Medical staff later acknowledged that his injuries were devastating. Still, in the days following, accounts from those closest to him painted conflicting pictures of whether survival was possible. Friends and family initially clung to optimism, yet other witnesses inside the hospital described the situation very differently. According to one account, Tupac died on the table one time in surgery 3 times and had to be resuscitated repeatedly. Each time his heart stopped, doctors fought to revive him, sometimes successfully. Eventually, however, the burden of these cycles became unbearable.
Like Pac, if I'm not mistaken, he died on the table one time in surgery 3 times. And they kept bringing him back to life multiple times.
Afeni Shakur, Tupac's mother, confronted the reality of her son's suffering. She described her decision not to prolong the cycle.
Stopped breathing 3 times, and they had revived him 3 times. and that every time they revived him, he just went back. And I asked him to leave him alone and to let him go. I really felt it was important for Tupac, who fought so hard to have a free spirit. I felt it was important for his spirit to be allowed to be free, And so I rejoiced with him and with the release of his spirit.
This decision was misunderstood by some fans, who incorrectly believed Afeni had pulled the plug. Close associates clarified that this was not the case. Doctors repeatedly attempted resuscitation, and Afeni eventually requested that further attempts be stopped after watching her son endure unbearable trauma. As one associate explained,
so when she kept saying this, and that's when she like, you know what, just if you don't bring him back to life this time, and if, they was whatever they was doing with the shock, them things, she like, just leave it alone.
The details of these medical interventions remain a source of contention. On one side, multiple witnesses, including family, friends, and medical staff, describe cycles of revival and collapse. On the other, paramedics at the scene and even police officers have claimed that Tupac was already effectively dead upon arrival, sustained artificially by machines. One officer stated,
and they said, you know what, when he got there, he was really dead when he got to the hospital. Because they're a state-of-the-art trauma center, they got his heart going with a machine. So he's got a machine keeping his heart going, but as far as real life and brain activity and stuff, there's nothing.
This discrepancy fueled theories that something unusual transpired within the hospital itself. Was Tupac's condition exaggerated as stable in order to control public perception? Did security concerns, with police officers posted inside and outside the ward, play a role in restricting information? Accounts differ, but multiple individuals recall optimism from doctors one moment and dire prognoses the next. The environment at UMC was tense. Death row affiliates, law enforcement, and family members converged. Afeni Shakur maintained a strong presence, reportedly dictating decisions and protecting her son's dignity. Associates later described her as unwavering in her insistence that Tupac's spirit not be shackled to machines indefinitely. Meanwhile, rumors spread quickly outside the hospital. Some suggested Tupac would recover, others claimed he was brain dead, and still others circulated conspiracies that he had faked his death or been secretly moved. The hospital itself released limited official statements, generally describing his condition as critical. The lack of transparency only deepened speculation. The physical reality was clear. Shakur was in grave condition. His chest wounds and loss of a lung meant that even if survival were achieved, his ability to rap, perform, or live independently would have been severely impaired. Associates admitted that while they wanted him to survive at any cost, Tupac himself, proud and ambitious, might not have tolerated such a future. As one put it,
do you think he would have wanted to survive and be in that condition?
I think she mentioned before, like, knowing how proudful he was, he would have been upset. He would have been upset because losing a lung, he probably would have never been able to rap again.
Despite these sobering realities, for nearly a week after the shooting, Tupac remained in the hospital, cycling between moments of stabilization and collapse. His room was under heavy police guard, and media coverage outside UMC turned the hospital into a national spectacle. Vigils formed, fans lit candles, and rumors of recovery alternated with whispers of death. On September 13th, 1996, 6 days after the shooting, Tupac succumbed. The official cause of death was respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest associated with multiple gunshot wounds. Yet the accounts of what transpired inside UMC, multiple revivals, contradictory prognoses, Afeni's intervention, and restrictions on information ensured that suspicion would endure. Theories quickly emerged suggesting Tupac was not merely a victim of gunfire, but of decisions made within hospital walls. Did resuscitation efforts prolong suffering unnecessarily? Did security officials manipulate the narrative of his condition? Was he silenced within the hospital itself to prevent him from revealing information about his attackers? While no definitive evidence supports these claims, the opacity of hospital events left space for doubt. Afeni Shakur's testimony remains the most definitive. She consistently maintained that she made her decision out of love and respect for her son's spirit. To her, the repeated resuscitations represented cruelty, and release represented freedom. Still, her choice, made under immense pressure and sorrow, has been scrutinized endlessly by fans unwilling to accept her reasoning. By the time Tupac's body was released to the Clark County coroner, the world was already awash in speculation. The 6 days at UMC had created more questions than answers. Conflicting accounts of his survival chances, the secrecy enforced by police, and the wrenching decisions made by Afeni set the stage for decades of theories that Tupac's death involved more than a drive-by shooting. The coroner, conspiracies, and the unanswered questions. After 6 turbulent days at University Medical Center, Tupac Amaru Shakur was officially pronounced dead on September 13, 1996 at 4:03 p.m. The official cause was listed as respiratory failure and cardiopulmonary arrest due to multiple gunshot wounds. His body was transferred to the Clark County Coroner's Office, where the official autopsy was conducted. The coroner's report documented the severity of Shakur's injuries: bullet wounds to the chest, pelvis, right thigh, and right hand, with the most catastrophic being the shot that pierced his right lung. Internal damage, massive blood loss, and the removal of the lung during surgery meant that recovery had been improbable from the beginning. The findings aligned with accounts from medical staff that Shakur's condition had been terminal, even as doctors struggled to keep him alive on machines. Yet, despite the straightforward pathology, the coroner's involvement only added fuel to suspicion. Many fans pointed out the speed with which Tupac's body was reportedly cremated. Within 24 hours of the autopsy, a decision that prevented any independent verification. Afeni Shakur later confirmed that she ordered cremation to protect her son's dignity and prevent morbid public spectacle. Still, for some, this swiftness appeared suspicious. Conspiracy theories proliferated almost immediately. One persistent claim argued that Tupac had never died at all, citing inconsistencies in the autopsy and the alleged absence of his name on certain coroner records. These suspicions were magnified by Tupac's known fascination with Machiavelli, the 16th century philosopher Niccolo Machiavelli, who had written about faking one's death to outwit enemies. The release of Tupac's posthumous album, The Don Killuminati, The 7-Day Theory, under the name Machiavelli, only deepened speculation that the artist had staged his own demise. Others pointed directly at the hospital itself. Accounts from paramedics and officers suggested Tupac was really dead upon arrival, sustained artificially only by machines.
And they said, you know what, when he got there, he was really dead when he got to the hospital. Because they're a state-of-the-art trauma center, they got his heart going with a machine. So he's got a machine keeping his heart going, but as far as real life and brain activity and stuff, there's nothing.
If true, this contradicted later claims of possible recovery, leading some to believe that misleading updates were given intentionally. The mystery endured for decades because the case went officially unsolved. Police failed to secure consistent cooperation from witnesses, including Yaki Gaddafi, a member of Tupac's entourage who claimed he could identify the shooter, but was himself killed 2 months later before police interviewed him. Orlando Anderson, the suspected gunman, was murdered in 1998, never charged in connection with Tupac's death. Meanwhile, contradictory stories persisted about Tupac's last days at UMC, his repeated revivals, Afeni's decision to halt resuscitations, and the guarded secrecy around his hospital room provided fertile ground for speculation. To some, the hospital was not simply where Tupac died, but where a decision was made to ensure he would not return. The narrative shifted dramatically in 2023 when prosecutors charged Dwayne Keefe D. Davis, a former Compton Crips leader, with orchestrating the killing. Davis himself had long implicated his nephew, Orlando Anderson, as the shooter, and admitted in interviews and his memoir that he supplied the gun. During his arrest, Davis was described as the shot caller of the attack.
We are here today to announce the arrest of 60-year-old Dwayne Keith Davis, aka Keefe D, for the murder of Tupac Shakur.
While Keefe D didn't pull the trigger, police allege he was the shot caller.
Davis, however, has publicly denied guilt, claiming he was in Los Angeles the night of the shooting. From jail, he pointed the finger elsewhere, even at Reggie Wright Jr., a former cop and security guard for Death Row Records. Wright has denied involvement, but Davis's insistence that he is a patsy suggests that the case may remain mired in conflicting testimony.
61-year-old Dwayne Keefe D. Davis says the night of the murder, September 7, 1996, he was in Los Angeles, 300 miles from the Las Vegas intersection where Tupac Shakur was gunned down.
Even after this long-awaited arrest, many questions persist. Why did it take nearly 3 decades to bring charges when Keefe D had openly spoken about his role for years? Why were key witnesses never secured in the immediate aftermath? And most pressingly, what really happened in those final days inside UMC? The autopsy left no doubt about the physical cause of death, but what should have been a straightforward forensic closure became instead a fertile ground for suspicion. Part of the controversy came from the speed with which Shakur's body was cremated. Within 24 hours of the autopsy, Afeni Shakur ordered her son's remains cremated. This was her right as next of kin, and she later explained that she made the decision to protect her son's dignity, preventing his body from becoming a public spectacle. Still, the rapidity meant there was no opportunity for independent verification of the coroner's findings. For a public already primed by mistrust, this looked like evidence being rushed out of existence. Into this vacuum of uncertainty, conspiracy theories flourished. diverged. Some focused on inconsistencies in the coroner's records. Fans claimed that documents referred to Tupac at 6 feet tall and 215 pounds, statistics that didn't align with his real-life frame, closer to 5'9" and around 160 pounds. Whether clerical error or not, these discrepancies became proof to some that the body on the table was not Tupac's. The fact that the coroner's office did not publicly clarify only strengthened such suspicions. Theories soon branched in two directions. One argued that Tupac had been deliberately silenced inside the hospital, either through withheld treatment or through a decision not to let him survive. The other claimed that Tupac had never died at all, that the autopsy was falsified, and the cremation staged to enable his escape. Both interpretations relied on the lack of clarity surrounding those 6 days in the hospital. Support for the faked death theory was bolstered by Tupac's own art. In 1996, shortly before his death, he recorded the Don Killuminati, the 7-day theory under the alias Machiavelli. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Renaissance thinker after whom the pseudonym was inspired, had written about faking one's death to fool enemies. The album's title, referencing 7 days, also eerily paralleled Tupac's 6 days of survival in the hospital before dying on the 7th. To fans unwilling to accept the loss, this appeared to be a coded farewell, signaling that Tupac had orchestrated his own disappearance. But for those who accepted his death, questions shifted toward who was responsible and whether the truth had been suppressed. The simplest explanation pointed to Orlando Anderson, the Crips member beaten by Tupac and his entourage hours before the shooting. Former journalist Chuck Phillips concluded after a year-long investigation that Anderson was the gunman, aided by fellow Southside Compton Crips, and that the notorious Big himself financed the hit, offering $1 million and providing the murder weapon. Anderson denied involvement until his death in 1998, when he was shot in an unrelated gang dispute. Then there's Suge Knight. Former LAPD detective Russell Poole proposed that Suge Knight orchestrated the murder despite being in the same car. Theories suggested Knight feared Tupac leaving Death Row Records and taking millions in profits with him. At the time, Tupac had hinted at breaking ties with Death Row. Afeni Shakur later sued Knight for mishandling Tupac's earnings. Poole argued that Knight arranged the hit knowing his own reputation would make him appear above suspicion. Skeptics countered that Knight himself was struck in the head during the attack, though others argue his wound was superficial and potentially staged. The East Coast-West Coast feud fueled another theory, that Christopher Wallace, Biggie Smalls, paid for Tupac's killing in retaliation for insults and allegations in diss tracks. Phillips alleged that Biggie offered money and the weapon. Biggie, however, denied involvement and was himself murdered in Los Angeles just 6 months later, deepening the tragedy of the rap war. Detective Greg Kading, who led a later task force, also alleged that Sean P. Diddy Combs commissioned the murder out of fear that Suge Knight was planning to strike him first. Kading secured a confession from Keith D, Dwayne Davis, that Combs offered $1 million for the hit. Keith D claimed he supplied the gun to his nephew Orlando Anderson, who pulled the trigger. Though Combs has always denied involvement, labeling the claims ridiculous, the taped confession became central to later prosecutions. More radical theories suggest Tupac was targeted by the US government. His mother, Afeni Shakur, had been a Black Panther, and Tupac himself frequently clashed with law enforcement and addressed systemic racism in his music. FBI files later revealed that Tupac had been under surveillance. To some, this represented a clear motive, silencing a political and cultural agitator whose influence threatened established power structures. Beyond these, fringe claims tied Tupac's death to groups like the Jewish Defense League, which had allegedly issued threats against him. Others went as far as alien abductions or secret exile in Cuba. These theories gained traction mainly because of the perceived inconsistencies and the absence of a definitive resolution. The hospital itself remained central to conspiracy narratives. The fact that Tupac was revived multiple times, only for Afeni Shakur to eventually halt further attempts, gave rise to suspicions that medical staff could have prolonged his life if they wished. Critics wondered whether decisions inside UMC were influenced by outside pressure, from law enforcement, record executives, or unknown entities. Accounts from paramedics suggested that Tupac was already dead upon arrival, revived only by machines, while others described doctors optimistic about rehabilitation. Such contradictions provided fertile ground for speculation that the truth was deliberately obscured. Afeni's decision was perhaps the most misunderstood element. Her choice to stop resuscitation was not, as critics claimed, an active pulling of the plug. Rather, it was a refusal to allow her son's body to be shocked and jolted back repeatedly, only to collapse again. She later explained that she rejoiced in his release, believing that to continue would trap his spirit. Still, to fans unwilling to accept her reasoning, this became yet another suspicious chapter in a story already full of contradictions. For nearly 3 decades, the murder went officially unsolved, but in 2023, prosecutors charged Dwayne Keefe D. Davis with orchestrating the attack. He was described as the shot caller, accused of providing the weapon and directing his nephew Orlando Anderson to fire. His arrest followed years of public admissions, including a memoir and taped interviews in which he acknowledged involvement. Davis pleaded not guilty and insisted he had been hundreds of miles away on the night of the shooting. From behind bars, he accused others, including Reggie Wright Jr., a former death row security chief, of being involved. Wright has denied all allegations, stating that he was tasked with protecting Tupac and had no part in his death. Observers questioned why it took so long to prosecute Davis, given that his confessions had been public for years. Critics suggested that the delay reflected deeper systemic failures, perhaps even deliberate avoidance. Meanwhile, fans wondered whether Davis's arrest, decades later, was more about closure than truth, offering a legal scapegoat rather than resolving the enduring mysteries. The coroner's findings answered the forensic question of how Tupac Shakur died, but the broader question, why he died, and who ensured his death, remains unsettled. For many, suspicion lingers that he was silenced not only by bullets at Flamingo and Caval, but also by choices made inside UMC, whether medical, institutional, or conspiratorial. Afeni Shakur's testimony remains the most direct window into those final days. She insisted that her son was allowed to pass peacefully, his spirit freed from suffering. Yet her words have been dissected endlessly, contrasted against accounts of optimism from doctors, contradictions from paramedics, and silences from officials. Almost 3 decades later, Tupac's death is not merely a crime story but a cultural wound. The official record declares him dead at 25 from gunfire. The public imagination, however, insists on more: murder conspiracies, secret exiles, hospital betrayals, and government plots. That persistence reflects the scale of Tupac's influence. To millions, he was too important to simply die at a stoplight in Las Vegas, and so the coroner's final act, the examination of a body, did not end the story. It only ensured that Tupac's death would remain an open question, one that fans, investigators, and courts still struggle to answer. Was Tupac Shakur killed solely on the street, or was he finished inside the hospital? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out more like it by clicking the suggested cards on your screen.